Well, I was talking mostly about soil and climate when I was talking about soil health, but I had one of the viewers who had gotten back to me with a good question. He asked me, well, what do I do about maintaining good health in container soils? Okay, well, I'm afraid I don't have a pretty answer. Okay. Growing in containers is a little bit like living on the space shuttle or living on the space station. It's not a natural situation for the plant. And most things that happen to the plant when in a container are not the same as what happens when in the earth. Okay, so for instance, let's say if you dig up the soil from your backyard that you've been growing good pepper plants on, for instance. Peppers grow fine in the soil in your yard. Well, then you dump that same exact soil inside a container and put a pepper plant in it, and the plant struggles and suffers. It won't grow properly. Ordinarily, it is not possible to use pure native soil as a container soil mix. The conditions are too different. Ordinarily, the stuff will start to bake in there when it gets dry, turn into a brick or turn into mud, or things will rot off in it. Container soils are very, very specialized materials, and they don't really have an analog in natural soils. Now, the main point here, they break down. That's it. Your native soil accumulates unless you have erosion or some other factor. But ordinarily, native soils accumulate. The plant debris, animal debris, and so on. That's why when you're in archaeology, you dig. Because old stuff's down there someplace. It's buried. Yeah, it gets covered. And so natural soils accumulate. Artificial soils retreat. They disappear. They don't accumulate. They decompose for the most part. A major portion of an artificial container soil is organic material. Now, it can be a variety of different types of organic material. I tend to use materials here that are derived from sphagnum peat. I use professional growing mixes. There are a whole lot of soils out there that are derived from wood trash, sawmill trash. Most notably, stuff that was sold for years by Kellogg Cascade. Yeah, Kellogg, they used to be a sawmill. They were once a sawmill operation till the sawmill burned down. Then they went into the soils by digging the piles of sawdust they had. Wood-based compost for potting soils is a good material, especially when it's single-sourced, like it was redwood compost or something on this order, fir compost, something where you know exactly what it was. They also will use municipal waste from compost in potting soils, and that stuff is completely unpredictable. In general, if you see it labeled on the back of a potting soil bag, turn around and walk away. Don't even buy it. It's too unpredictable. You just don't know what's in there. Grass clippings, kitchen garbage, God knows, all sorts of different things. Most of them don't hold up long at all. They break down very quickly. In general, the more money you spend on a container soil, the better it's going to work. The less money you spend on a container soil is a good possibility it might even kill your plant. Honest, been there. Customer service desk guy for years and years in a nursery. Yeah, we used to guarantee our plants. Yeah, you buy a plant from us and it didn't perform right, you bring it back or bring a receipt back or something, and we'll give you another one, or we'll give you your money back, or whatever the deal was. Well, I used to frequently, enough at least that I recall it, I would get back plants that when they left our nursery had been good stuff, But then the client had gone over, say, to one of the big box chain stores and bought themselves the cheapest potting soil on the rack, trying to get a deal on the soil. They figure, oh, they paid good money for the plant with us. They got a pot that's more expensive than that plant even. You know, you got a $20 plant and a $100 pot. That's typical. So they try to save money, so they buy the cheapest soil that they can find because they figure, well, that's just dirt. Well, they'll bring the plant back, and the poor thing is rotted off on the roots and such because the soil had such poor drainage characteristics that in the container was overly large, it was overpotted, and the plant just died there. Yeah, I used to see this a lot. It wasn't uncommon that people don't think about the soil. Actually, the kind of pot you got, as long as there's drain holes in the bottom and it's big enough, doesn't matter. The plant, well, you want a nice looking one, but even if it's less than perfect, it's probably going to recover if you put it into a good soil and fertilize it. Yeah, the soil is next to the plant, the most important thing that goes into that pot. Now, a lot of soils have mineral constituents in them. Now, those mineral constituents don't break down quickly. We see soils like for cacti, for instance, will have pumice. Some of them will even have lava particles in them. Most soils have perlite, just a popped volcanic rock. It's a white popcorn-looking stuff. That doesn't break down very quickly either. Vermiculite, that's the silvery mica-looking stuff. It holds moisture. Perlite mostly makes aeration. These materials tend to hold up longer in the pot than the compost that they're embedded in. So the compost or the organic matter, maybe a sphagnum peat or something, really become the Achilles heel in a container soil. Part of the problem is that the stuff just keeps breaking down year after year, and the particles become smaller and smaller and smaller. In a good potting soil, we like to see angular particles that are, say, maybe even a quarter of an inch, that way there's loft created. These pieces stack one on another, and they leave air spaces in between them, so there's air in the soil. But as the soil ages, the stuff gets finer and finer. All the fine particles wash to the bottom of the container with watering, and then they kind of block up the drain hole like mud, and the roots will generally begin to rot in them. It's typical. Plants that aren't transplanted rapidly or properly usually end up rotting is a typical way they go away. Although they can die from drought too, because there'll be nothing left in the container but the roots. I've seen that in my own nursery before when I was unattentive on something in a pot. The stuff breaks down so thoroughly and then is washed away by your irrigation that you can just sit there with a stringy mass of roots in a bucket that hardly has anything but some muck underneath it. So as far as maintaining health in container soils, replace them. It's about the only solution I have. If you live here in Hawaii or in other places where we have a lot of root knot nematode, if your containers are less than 18 inches off the ground, expect them to become infested with root knot nematode pretty quickly. Within a couple of years of planting at least. I know I had a cucumber plant over here the other day that was still there, but it wasn't doing anything. I got curious. I pulled it up. Oh, was it gross. Oh, poor thing. Oh, yeah, the roots looked like cancer. There were so many knots on them. It was the nematodes. They were in the pot. Yeah, it was a potted cucumber. They're still in there. I'll be taking the container eventually here, dumping it, renewing the soil. I think I'm going to be moving some of my vegetable containers on the top of my planting bench in the rear here. Keep them a little higher off the ground, maybe have less nematode problems. I don't seem to see nematode problems in my nursery tables. They're 18 inches off the ground. Nematodes don't swim that high. Of course, in a container, since it dries out rapidly, I can plant a tree in a field here in Hawaii, and with our normal rainfall, even during drought periods, if the tree's established, I don't really need to water it. It'll get by. There's enough moisture. But that's not true in the nursery pots out here. In these containers, sometimes the kind of weather we're having today, clear, high, blue, beautiful, the tourists are happy as all get out, and I am going to be on the other end of my garden hose. Yeah, because the little pots especially are going to dry out by afternoon. Things are going to start dying quickly. Pots dry out really fast. Now, I like in the nursery to use fertilizers that are labeled 6 or 12 month. I prefer that, but I don't get 12 months out of a 12-month fertilizer in this climate. If it isn't the rain leaching the fertilizers out of the pot, then it's my hose. If it's been sunny constantly, I'm running around with hoses. Every time I put a hose on the pot, I flush nutrients out the bottom of the container and they hit the ground. And so your potted plants will run out of nutrients much faster than your plants that are in the ground. In the ground, if the plant has a pretty good sized root system, then it can do what I call foraging. That it will have spread itself to such an extent that even if the soil isn't really heavily fertile, it'll find enough to get by on because the root system is so extensive. Yeah, I see it a lot. Yet a container, they're trapped. They can't go anywhere, man. And so they're reliant on you. And if you let the fertilizer slip, the plant goes south fast. It's going to start turning yellow. Growth will stop. It'll just sit there and look at you. And you go, what's wrong with you, plant? I'm starving. That's what it's doing. Yeah. And generally speaking, it takes more fertilizer in a container than most people are willing to admit. A lot of folks like to use liquid type fertilizers, and yeah, they're okay. I use fish emulsion as a liquid. It's all right. I like the stuff enough, but as far as a reliable long-term feed, no. Pelletized chicken manure as an organic, as a long-term, is a pretty good feed. I like using pretty much time-released fertilizers like Nutricoat in the nursery. They're not organic. Okay, so in my garden and in my orchard, I use organic fertilizers on the food that I eat. But in the plants in the nursery, I find life much simpler not to try to do that. You can, and I have, and it's more work than I want to go through to produce a good product. If you come in here and the stock looks yellow and stunted, everybody walks away. That can happen to you with organic fertilizers because most of them will not release over a long period of time. They release longer than like a liquid like Miracle Grow, which is only good for maybe 7 days or so in this climate. So if you're using Miracle Grow, read the label. It says every 7 to 14 days. If you haven't got a life, you got time to use that fertilizer. I don't have much of a life, but I ain't got time for that fertilizer. It's too frequent. Great name, Miracle Grow, but wow, what a pain in the butt. And in fact, some of the major brand names of things on the market out there are not necessarily the best ones. Miracle Grow works, and whether you want to use it or not as a fertilizer is up to you, but remember, read the label. The intervals are really important. And again, read the label. It has to be diluted. I remember a client I had in California where I went through, and for a wedding they were having on the property, I planted up dozens of beautiful color bowls and hanging baskets filled with flowers, and then I embedded some time-release fertilizers in there so that they would hold up and last for quite a while. Well, woman of the house being all nervous about the wedding and freaking out and thinking, oh, maybe the flowers aren't going to be big enough for the wedding. She went and took undissolved Miracle Grow crystals and put them in all of the work I did for her. She killed everything. Yeah. A week prior to the wedding, she killed all the color bowls. She didn't read the label. You got to dilute the stuff in water. Plus, the plants were already fed by me. Nerves. belief systems, people's thoughts. Boy, oh boy, I looked at that, and the woman's a doctor. Yeah, many years of education, highly educated woman. He became incredibly dumb overnight because she was panicking about a wedding, I guess. Anyway, I've seen damage from Miracle-Gro. I've seen also starving plants from Miracle-Gro too, in both directions, depending on how you use it. And their soils, most of them are made so that they say moisture retentive or moisture holding, something on that order. Some of it is probably a silica gel, but they also use peat that I would call it's black peat that's the real fine, almost greasy, little teeny weeny particles, and they definitely hold moisture, that's for sure, but they hold a little bit too much. And under drought conditions, these soils probably work out fairly well, but as you have seen from the weather lately, things seem to turn around real fast. And I have seen the soils create problems by killing plants when people overwater, or the containers weren't draining fast enough, or the soils became too old, that they were in there for too long, too, that they really will begin to rot things. Alrighty, well, there's a little bit about soil health in containers, and soil health in containers is really all about right type container, right size container, good drainage on the container, buy the good soils. Don't spend money on the cheap stuff. You're not saving any money. Buy quality materials and throw them out about every 3 years or so. Like I said, that compost is fine dumped in the orchard or other places out on the earth. It's fine to reuse it there for as organic matter. You don't have to put it in the trash, but you want to put brand new fresh stuff in those containers. Off the top of my head, folks, it's the only way I know to maintain health in containers. That's it. And you're dealing with a guy here who more than half a lifetime has been working in container plants. I do field farming and I do ground gardening, but I do more container growing. That's been my business for a long time. I think I know a thing or two about it. Yeah, well, okay. Aloha, hang loose, and hope for better weather, huh?